Hi, this is Professor Rhoades. Welcome to Personal Finance. This is an overview of the first class preparation assignment, learning how to learn. All right, we're going to cover how to make long-term memories. So many times you study something in one semester and comes to the next semester, you're supposed to know this, but you've forgotten it. So we're going to learn how to put things in the long-term memory better and also make learning more efficient, less time that you spend on studying as a practical matter while achieving better. So how do we do that? There's techniques. So there's so much that we've learned about learning in recent years. So we're going to talk about spaced interval learning and retrieval practice, which kind of go hand in hand, interleaving, why sleep is so important, and also we're going to just touch on expanding your comfort zone. That's kind of an add-on to this lesson. All right, so question for you, all right? How many of you are above average drivers for relative to people of your own age? Right? If I ask this question in class, chances are that the majority of you would say that you're an above average driver. In fact, it's not a bell curve, right? It's shifted one way to the other. Most of us have a bias, and it's a bias that basically it's a self-confidence bias, which is very good in some respects, but we're overconfident of our own abilities. So if I asked you, how much sleep does the average college student need, or how much sleep do you as a college student need every night on average? How many hours? What would you say? Well, it turns out that the answer to this is quite surprising. The answer is 9 hours, 15 minutes. 9 hours and 15 minutes. How many people actually get that much sleep? Not that many. Now, there's different studies on this. A lot of studies show somewhere between 7 and 10 hours, depending on the studies. A lot of studies say, when you're young and your brain is really functioning in college and the like, you really need about 8 to 9 hours of sleep. But one study by Dr. James Moss basically said 9 hours, 15 minutes. Yes. So, simple test. Have you gotten enough sleep? If you're yawning before 5 o'clock, even after a big lunch, if you're in class or at a meeting or whatever, and you're yawning before 5 o'clock, you did not get enough sleep. You shouldn't be drowsy during the day. So what happens during sleep? Well, it turns out that sleep is really important. In the rest of our bodies, basically we have this lymphatic system that removes waste. So our cells are working throughout the day, our muscles are working and things like that. And those cells generate waste products. And those waste products have to be removed from our body. But the brain does not have the lymphatic system in it. All it has is the cerebrospinal fluid, I believe it's called. Right? It's on the outside of your brain. It cushions against impacts and stuff while you're moving. But while you're asleep, passages open up in your brain and allow all that cerebral spinal fluid to flow in and out about 5 times during the night to basically clean out all the toxins in your brain. That's important because your brain consumes at least 20% of the total energy that your body consumes, even though it's not that big in terms of mass compared to the rest of your body. It consumes 20% of the energy, so it generates a lot of debris. So if you don't get enough sleep, you're not cleaning your brain sufficiently at night, and you're going to end up literally with brain fog. Yeah, right. So sleep, if you don't get enough sleep, there's a lot of adverse effects of that. It can affect your mood. You can become sick because your immune system is suppressed. It can lead to diabetes and weight gain and, oh my gosh, infertility. Let's not go there. Low libido, even worse. Oh my gosh, heart disease, and quite a number of other conditions, including some forms of cancer, are more prevalent for people who don't get enough sleep. Yeah. So again, when you're ages of about 16 to 24, somewhere in there, and it peaks around age 20, 21, that's the time where you get most sleep in your life other than being an infant, right? So how do we address getting things into our memory? Well, if you get a good night's sleep, you have this ability to encode things into your memory, all right? And to encode something, we need to perceive it. We need to think, hey, this is important, this is something I ought to learn because we get exposed to tens of thousands of data bits every second in our life. And our brain obviously can't absorb everything. It actually only absorbs about 30 per second. So we want to basically focus and say, this is important. We want to give it our attention, so to speak. And that gets it into our short-term memories, which is kind of buried a little bit in the hippocampus. Some of it's in our cerebral, but most of it's back in our hippocampus. And that short-term memory starts to decline after 36 hours. If you haven't gotten sleep, all that is gone. All that short-term memory is gone. So what you want to do is get good sleep. During the process of sleep, not only is your brain clean, but what is in your short-term memory moves into your long-term memory. And once it's in your long-term memory, can start forming connections with things that you've learned before. So, if somebody is really struggling to say, how does this relate to something else? And somebody says, oh, just sleep on it. It'll probably come to you tomorrow. The reason that happens is because once you have to get that new memory, that new learning into your long-term memory, and then form those connections to prior long-term memories. Pretty interesting stuff in my view. All right. So getting enough sleep basically helps you consolidate your memories a lot better and strengthen them. Then you need to strengthen those memories, because just because you have something in your memory doesn't mean you're going to stay there forever. Those neural connections are pretty weak after just one session of learning. Even after some more recent studies is that you ought to study something, go over a concept, for example, 3 times when you're initially learning it. And that will help you get in long-term memory, but you still have to strengthen those neural connections afterwards. And how do we do that? Well, it's by repetition, essentially. And the 2 techniques that are typically talked about the most, one is spaced interval learning, and the other is retrieval practice. And they kind of go hand in hand, right? So the concept is this: you learn something, you forget it, all right? Even if you got enough sleep and everything, you're going to forget a good part of it, maybe 80% of it over time. But if you repeat that, you're going to remember more of that. And if you repeat it again, you're going to remember more of it. So it's this process of repetition. It's called spaced interval learning. And it's not that you repeat it on the same day, because once you relearn something or you repeat it, where is that function stored again? Some of it's in your short-term memory. It needs to get back into your long-term memory and strengthen those neural connections again. The other thing we note about this is that you don't just do one day and then one day, the next day and the next day. You actually space this out. So you start with day 1. You might repeat something on day 2 and day 3, but then go to day 5, and then 4 days after that, and then 7 days after that, and a month after that, and the like. So you stretch out basically when you come back and look at things. The other part of this is retrieval practice. You've probably been taught, hey, read this chapter, highlight everything, and then reread it later, right? Go over your highlights and the like. That's a powerful method, but a much more powerful method is when you ask your brain to retrieve things out of memory. Even if you can't retrieve things, you're focusing on that. And that process of retrieving strengthens your neural connections a great deal. Now, the best way of doing that I have found is flashcards. And a lot of people say, I don't have time to make flashcards. Well, guess what? We have an app for that. It's called Quizlet, yes. And your professor has got that app, and he's made Quizlets for you. So, and we'll actually do those Quizlets during class. Why? Well, this is a flip class, as we've talked about before. So there are different ways of using retrieval practice, reviewing your past papers, looking to see what was wrong, practice tests, quizzes. Another reason we do quizzes in class. Essay answers, which is very important. In my mind, again, you study differently when you know that you're going to have to write an essay on something during an exam than you do with multiple choice tests. Multiple choice tests, unless they're done with case studies and the like, basically test your ability to recognize a concept, not your understanding of it. But if you have to explain something, you can understand it. So answering questions in class, yeah. So if somebody poses a question to you, it might be your professor, it might be a teammate that poses the question to you. Right? Answering that question is important. Of course, flashcards, making your own questions and answering. especially out loud. The more senses you involve in the learning process, the better. Having somebody else ask you, so study groups can be very important. Yeah. So how do we apply this in the class? Well, the first process of learning in this class is basically the readings and videos that you do through perusal. So you click on that assignment in Blackboard, it takes you to perusal, and then there's some videos to watch and some readings. Sometimes they are interspersed with each other. You have to do 2 annotations, and there's 2 quiz questions, and you can also upvote other students' annotations. Basically, the goal there is to get you actively engaged in the reading process, hopefully through a collaboration with other students who are doing it. That's the purpose of those annotations and comments. And so far, the preliminary research showing that's better. One, it kind of holds you accountable because it's for points. Right? The other is the collaborative nature of the process actually engages your mind more actively. Right? Now, during class, remember, you hopefully got a good night's sleep after you did all the perusal readings and the like. Got a good night's sleep. You come to class, and the very first thing I'm going to ask, in most classes, not all, but in most, as a team, come up with 4 things you learned from the prior class. So we're going back at least 2 days and sometimes 4 days or even longer, maybe 5, to basically recall from our memories things that we learned in the prior class. So that's part of the repetition practice. Yeah. Again, it's to strengthen those memories. And then I'll be calling upon teams at random to come before the front of the class, and each member of the team just says, here's one thing I learned, and you can actually read from your paper when you do that. Of course, lecture. There'll be some lectures in this class. There'll be discussions. There'll be exercises that you do. All right. And there's Quizlets. We'll actually do the Quizlets in class because in my past experience, if I do Quizlets and I say, here, please do this before class, only a handful of students will do them. And it's so important from a standpoint of retrieval practice to do Quizlets that for the long-term learning process that I've basically moved that into the classroom. And there's quizzes. Well, if you do well on the Quizlets, you're likely to do well on the quizzes. Yeah, and quizzes are, of course, graded. And then at the end of mini classes, unless we have a graded exercise, something you turn in at the end of class, otherwise, I'll ask you typically to write down 3 things you learn, and that's worth 3 points typically. So that's 0.3%, 0.3% of your final grade. Just writing those things, I have a little alarm on my phone. It goes off 3 minutes before the end of class, and basically reminds us, ask your time to write down 3 things on Blackboard. Just click on that section of Blackboard and write those things down. You could have your computer open during the class and write down a whole bunch of things. Hopefully you're taking notes. Handwritten notes are actually better, but if you take notes on your computer, or even if you're taking them by hand, you can copy and paste them over to the 3 things that you learn in class. Of course, review sessions for exams. We do a review session before each of the 3 exams in this class. It's just another way of getting that retrieval practice and that repetition, that spaced interval learning. The review sessions are typically done through something I call Team Jeopardy, where all the teams basically compete against each other for extra credit points. So another concept related to learning is something you might want to incorporate in by yourself. Now, some of my students say, this is really more effective for me, and others say, not the way I study. But I'd say at least half found that interleaving really helps them. And what is interleaving? Well, it's taking topics, not necessarily like you need a chapter in this course and there's a chapter in this course, but you might even break down those chapters by topics and try to break it down like into 20 to 30 minute sessions. And you do a topic in one course, and then you go to the next course, you do another topic, and then you go to the next course, you do another topic, and you come back to the first course and do the second topic, then you come back to the next course and you do another topics and so forth. It's interleaving among the different classes what you're doing. And what's interesting is the academic research has shown that's more effective in terms of helping your long-term memory formation. I'm not sure why. It might be because one of the suggestions they have is to give yourself a 5-minute break between sessions. And just try to make sure it's 5 minutes. Don't get distracted and go off and do something else. Give yourself a nice 5-minute break. and then go into another 20 to 30-minute session. It might be because there's a certain amount of attention time that some people have where after 20, 30 minutes, they basically start losing their attention on something. There are other people, however, who can stay focused for a lot longer, and for them, interleaving may or may not work. But certainly, I suggest that you give it a try. All right. So there's a difference between the spaced interval learning, or the spacing effect. That's the time between when we revisit material, different days. Interleaving is switching between topics in a single learning session, is the traditional thought about interleaving. Now, just a final thing here, comment, we do expand your comfort zone exercises as we talked about in class. That's about developing skills that you need as well as knowledge, because employers are looking for both of those things. There are 3 sets of expand your comfort zone exercises. There's a list of things that you can choose from. You can also make up your own as long as it challenges you. Right. So group A exercises, you go into the discussion boards, you'll see them. You can choose one of those. You might want to go ahead and identify which one of those you're going to tackle. After you do it, you post to the discussion board, you answer the questions that I posed there. Basically, it's what did you do? How did it go? Would you do it again? Would you recommend this activity to others? All right. And you do a nice posting about that. A few paragraphs is likely sufficient. And then read other people's comments. Find out what they did. It might give you an idea for what to do next time. You might say, I really want to try that. And then comment on at least 2. So do at least 2 comments on other people's posts. A constructive comment, a supportive comment in some way, or even say, wow, that was really fascinating. I'm going to do that now. Something like that. So these expand your comfort zone exercises are done on your own, but there's kind of collaborative nature to the point that we use the discussion board to exchange ideas and insights into what you've done. And we'll find that some of the exercises are quite popular, and others quite challenging in some respects. So hope you enjoy doing these. It's this whole why do the expand your comfort zone again is helping you kind of focus on the fact that you need to develop these skills, especially social skills. And you can also focus on developing better habits, like how much time do you spend on video games or watching Netflix and stuff like that? Should you constrain that? Or on social media? What happens if you disconnect from those things? How does that affect your life? And should you be making new habits or adjusting your habits or getting rid of bad habits? Those are all things that you can do incrementally as well. All right, well, thank you. That's the rest of this. That's enough for this video. Thank you.